What is the true nature of the Midnight Express, and why does it only appear in the dead of night, shrouded in mist? What happened to the man who took the last known photograph of the Midnight Express, and why did he disappear without a trace? Why do the passengers aboard the Midnight Express never return the same or at all, and what dark fate awaits those who dare to board it? I will leave you the space to search for answers to the questions in the comments. On a cold, moonless night, a train known as the Midnight Express roared through the dark forest. It was a relic from a bygone era, its black iron frame gleaming under the dim lights of the station. The train's reputation was infamous. Those who boarded never returned the same, if they returned at all. Legends spoke of its cursed nature, haunted by the souls of those who had died tragically within its metal confines. Maria, a young journalist, had heard the tales and was determined to uncover the truth. Armed with a camera and a notebook, she bought a ticket and boarded the train at the deserted station. As she stepped inside, the air grew colder, and an unnatural silence enveloped her. The passengers, if they could be called that, were eerily still, their faces hidden behind veils of shadow. Maria shivered but pushed forward, determined to document the journey. The train's interior was a disturbing blend of old and new. The seats were worn and tattered, yet the lights flickered with a strange, modern intensity. Maria noticed a series of strange symbols etched into the wooden panels of the walls, glowing faintly in the dim light. She snapped a few photos and made a note to research them later. As the train lurched forward, Maria felt a wave of nausea. The landscape outside the window blurred into a dizzying mix of colors and shapes, defying all logic. The other passengers remained unnervingly still, their eyes fixed on the distance. Maria tried to engage one of them in conversation, but her words seemed to vanish into the air, as if swallowed by the train itself. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, and a loud, guttural moan echoed through the train. Maria's heart raced as she looked around for the source of the sound, but there was nothing, just the oppressive darkness and the growing sense of dread. The train's whistle blew, but it was not a normal sound. It was a long, drawn-out wail, filled with anguish and despair. The train began to speed up, its wheels screeching against the tracks. The temperature dropped further, and Maria could see her breath in the air. She moved to the next car, where the atmosphere was even more oppressive. The passengers here were different. Some were covered in dirt, their clothes torn and blood-stained, while others seemed to flicker in and out of existence, their forms translucent and ghostly. Maria's pulse quickened as she realized that these were not ordinary passengers. They were spirits, lost souls trapped on the train, doomed to relive their final moments over and over again. One spirit, a young girl with hollow eyes, stared directly at Maria and whispered, "Help us." The words sent chills down her spine, and she hurried to the next car. As Maria moved deeper into the train, the atmosphere became increasingly nightmarish. The walls seemed to close in on her, and the sounds of sobbing, screaming, and whispers filled her ears. The symbols on the walls began to pulse with a sickly green light, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. In the next car, Maria encountered a figure she would never forget. It was the conductor, but his face was twisted into a grotesque mask of suffering. His eyes were hollow pits, and his hands were skeletal. He held out a ticket to Maria, but she recoiled in horror. The ticket was stained with blood, and the name on it was her own. "You shouldn't have come," the conductor rasped, his voice a grating whisper. "Now you're one of us?" Maria backed away, but the door behind her slammed shut, trapping her inside the car. The conductor stepped closer, and as he did, the walls of the train began to distort, twisting and writhing like a living thing. Maria felt a crushing weight on her chest as the reality of her situation sank in. She was not just a passenger, she was part of the train now. The train plunged into a tunnel, and the darkness was absolute. Maria could hear the sound of chains rattling, the wails of the damned, and the ominous creak of the train's structure as it twisted and groaned under some unseen force. The air was thick with fear, and Maria could barely breathe. The train's speed increased, hurtling through the tunnel at a breakneck pace. In the darkness, Maria could see flashes of horrific visions, mangled bodies, burning landscapes, and monstrous creatures with glowing eyes. The symbols on the wall seemed to come alive, writhing and pulsing, as if they were sentient beings. The boundaries between the cars began to blur, and Maria found herself in a never-ending loop, moving from one nightmare to the next. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. Her mind was unraveling, her grip on reality slipping away. She could feel the presence of the other passengers, no longer just spirits, but malevolent entities, feeding off her fear and despair. They whispered in her ear, taunting her, promising an eternity of torment. Just when Maria thought she could take no more, the train emerged from the tunnel. The sudden light was blinding, and the train screeched to a halt. Maria stumbled forward, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. She was in the final car now, and there was only one door left, a massive iron door with the same symbols etched into its surface. She hesitated, knowing that whatever lay beyond that door would be the culmination of her nightmare. But there was no turning back. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty, save for a single mirror standing in the center. The glass was cracked and dirty, but Maria could see her reflection clearly. As she approached, the reflection began to change, warping and distorting until it no longer resembled her at all. Instead, she saw a monstrous figure, a twisted amalgamation of all the horrors she had witnessed on the train. The figure reached out from the mirror, its claws extending toward Maria. She tried to back away, but the room had closed in around her, leaving her nowhere to run. The claws gripped her shoulders, and she felt a cold, searing pain as they dug into her flesh. "Join us," the figure hissed, its voice a chorus of all the damned souls on the train. "Become one with the darkness." Maria struggled, but the pull was too strong. The mirror began to ripple like water, and she felt herself being dragged into it. Her vision blurred, and she could hear the distant sound of the train's whistle, growing louder and more insistent. In a final act of desperation, Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out the camera. She aimed it at the mirror and snapped a photo, the flash illuminating the room in a brilliant burst of light. The figure recoiled, shrieking in pain, and the grip on Maria's shoulders loosened. Seizing the opportunity, Maria pulled herself free and ran toward the door. The room was collapsing around her, the walls closing in, but she forced herself to keep moving. She could feel the train's malevolent presence all around her, trying to pull her back, but she pushed forward with all her strength. With a final burst of energy, she flung herself through the door and out of the train. She landed hard on the cold, damp ground outside, gasping for breath. The train let out one last mournful wail before disappearing into the darkness, leaving Maria alone in the night. Maria never spoke of what happened on the Midnight Express, but she could never forget. The scars on her shoulders were a permanent reminder of the horrors she had faced. The photos she took that night were too disturbing to show anyone, and she eventually destroyed them. But every night, as she lay in bed, she could hear the distant sound of a train whistle echoing through the darkness. And she knew that the Midnight Express was still out there, waiting for its next passenger. Maria tried to move on with her life, but the terror she experienced on the Midnight Express lingered like a dark cloud over her every waking moment. She quit her job as a journalist, retreating to a small, isolated town where she hoped the nightmares wouldn't follow. But they did. Every night she would wake up drenched in sweat, the sound of that cursed train whistle echoing in her mind. The visions of the ghostly passengers and the monstrous figure from the mirror haunted her dreams, dragging her back to the endless corridors of the train. She often found herself staring out her window into the dark woods surrounding her home, half expecting to see the train emerge from the shadows. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but the fear never faded. Maria's once vibrant spirit dulled, her eyes hollow, and her skin pale. She became a recluse, avoiding contact with the outside world. The few people who saw her whispered that she had been touched by something otherworldly, that the darkness of the Midnight Express had marked her for life. One particularly stormy night, as Maria sat by the fireplace, trying to distract herself with a book, she heard it again, the faint, mournful whistle of the train. Her heart skipped a beat, and she froze, listening intently. The sound was growing louder, closer. Panic gripped her as she rushed to the window. There, in the distance, she saw it, the Midnight Express, its ghostly outline barely visible through the sheets of rain. The train was approaching her house, its black iron frame gleaming in the flashes of lightning. Maria stumbled back from the window, her mind racing. It couldn't be real. She had escaped it. She had broken free, but deep down she knew the truth. The Midnight Express had never truly let her go. It had merely bided its time, waiting for the right moment to claim her. The ground shook as the train pulled up outside her house, its engine roaring like a beast from the depths of hell. The whistle blew again, and Maria felt an irresistible pull, as if the train were calling her name. She clutched her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The front door creaked open on its own, and a cold wind swept through the house, extinguishing the flames in the fireplace. Maria stood paralyzed, her eyes wide with terror as she watched the door slowly swing open. Beyond it, she saw the train's doors slide apart, revealing the dark interior. A shadowy figure stepped out of the train, its form barely discernible in the storm. It was the conductor, his skeletal hand outstretched, holding that same blood-stained ticket with her name on it. "Time to return," he rasped, his voice echoing with the cries of the damned. Maria shook her head, backing away in desperation. But there was no escape. The walls of her house began to twist and warp, just as the train had. The air grew thick with the stench of death, and she could hear the whispers of the ghostly passengers, urging her to join them. "No, no, please," she begged, but her voice was lost in the howling wind. The conductor stepped closer, and Maria felt that familiar crushing weight on her chest, the same sensation she had felt on the train. Her vision blurred, the room spinning around her as the train's oppressive presence filled every corner of her mind. With the last of her strength, Maria turned and ran toward the back of the house. But as she reached the hallway, she stopped dead in her tracks. The hallway had transformed into the endless corridor of the Midnight Express, its walls lined with the same eerie symbols that glowed with a sickly light. She was back on the train. "No," Maria screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the darkness. The conductor appeared behind her, his skeletal hand resting on her shoulder. She felt the icy grip of his claws digging into her flesh, just as they had in the mirror. "It's time to finish the journey," he whispered. Maria's legs buckled, and she collapsed to the floor, the weight of the curse pressing down on her. She could feel her soul being pulled from her body, drawn toward the abyss that awaited her. The train's whistle blew one last time, a sound so filled with despair that it broke her will. As her vision faded, Maria caught one last glimpse of the mirror from the final car. In it she saw herself not as the woman she once was, but as one of the twisted, tormented souls she had encountered on the train. Her reflection smiled, a wicked, knowing smile that sent shivers down her spine, and then everything went black. Maria's house remained abandoned, a silent reminder of the woman who had once lived there. The townspeople occasionally heard strange sounds at night, the distant roar of a train, the mournful wail of a whistle, and the echo of a woman's screams. But they dared not speak of it, for fear of drawing the curse upon themselves. As for Maria, she was never seen again. But the Midnight Express continued its journey through the dark forests, forever cursed, forever searching for more souls to claim. And on certain stormy nights, if you listen closely, you might hear its whistle in the distance, a chilling reminder that once you board the ghost train, there is no escape. The Midnight Express will always come for you. At the end of the story, if you like the story, do not forget to share it with your friends and like and subscribe so that we can continue to provide you with the best.